Hello, my name is Meredith Kutz, a Professional Development Associate here at NACE. I'd like to welcome you to today's event, Building Career Readiness in a Virtual World. It is my pleasure to introduce Jeannie Liakaris from today's sponsor, Cappfinity.
Now I'm on mute. It is such a pleasure to be here today with all of you and with the esteemed panel. We're so pleased to be sharing Building Career Readiness in a Virtual World. Please feel free to take note of any of these support numbers in case you need it for today. And we'll be having the chat and the Q&A function. And so just before we begin, I wanted to welcome everyone on behalf of Cappfinity. We're so pleased to be sponsoring today's session with NACE, Building Career Readiness in a Virtual World. I've been a longstanding member of NACE, and it's really a great privilege to be sharing this virtual stage with our esteemed panel of professionals. This topic is near and dear to many of us on this call, as we've seen with the response rate, and especially here at Cappfinity. And, you know, we're an HR tech company, and we've been partnering with global organizations for the past 15 years to help really transform organizations, their pre-hire and development approaches, from everything from early careers to senior leaders through a strengths-based lens. We're super passionate about the candidate experience and increasing social mobility, as well as, most importantly, removing bias from the hiring process. And we're led by an expert team of workplace psychologists and data scientists, coaches and assessors. And, you know, our goal is really to help ensure that we are helping organizations remove bias from their hiring process while also finding and retaining the best talent. And so with that, I am so pleased to be introducing you today to Lindsey Pollak, who is a New York Times bestselling author of 3 books and another one on the way. Dr. Manny Contomanolis, who is the Senior Associate Vice President for Employer Engagement and Career Design at Northeastern University, and Chelsea Williams, who is the founder and CEO of College Code. And I am so pleased to have all of them here today to take us through the session. And it's going to be sort of a 3-part series. We're going to explore what's working and what's not working in this changed campus recruitment landscape. We're going to focus on how virtual recruitment is impacting diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, and obviously learn from the experience of one university and from each other, and then break it up and actually give us a chance to hear from the audience as well, because we want to make sure that we get as many questions answered from your end. And so without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Lindsey Pollak.
Jeannie, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for joining and for participating in our first question. There are so many strengths that we are seeing from students, from career services professionals, and from employers during this very challenging, but also really opportunistic time. So my job on our very esteemed panel today is to start with talking about what employers are seeing and asking for in this new hybrid virtual world. So to answer that question, I have recently taken on a role with Cappfinity, so delighted to work with Jeannie and the team. And we conducted a research project, and you can see the methodology on the slide of what we did. From May to October of this year, and we are about to enter phase 2, we conducted global research with career services professionals, some of whom are on this call, and employers and some students to talk about what they were doing in the internship process and in the recruiting scene. We came up with 6 key outcomes. I'm going to share 3 of them with you today, but we'd be delighted to share the full research at any time. And I positioned it as the great virtual recruiting experiment of 2020, because nobody entered this knowing exactly what they were doing. So there were challenges, but there was also a tremendous opportunity for creativity. So Jeannie, if you can turn to the next slide, I wanted to start with a quotation from one of the people we interviewed, who was a recruiter in the United States, who said, when I'm not recruiting, I'm part of something my company calls the new reality team, ensuring we take all the learning from this experience to inform our tomorrow. And that's my goal with my colleagues today. How do we really look at what we've done over the past several months and use it as a way to move forward positively? This also, I think, was emblematic of the fact that many recruiters had their role sort of elevated in their organizations, and many described to us that they had a seat at the table in leadership conversations that they hadn't had before, and so that put them in a very unique position. So to start with our 3 takeaways, the first was that many employers said it was critically important that we ensure that students know that recruiting is open for business. Here was a quotation from somebody in the UK. My worry is for candidates. There's evidence this happened in the financial crash. They assume the labor market is dead and nobody is recruiting. So they just totally disengage. 50% of UK entry-level employers didn't fill all their vacancies in 2009. They weren't getting people to apply to those jobs. It won't be easy for students this year and next, but it might be better than they think. And for those of you who were also on the NACE town hall the other day, this was one of the key takeaways for me, that many recruiters are actually seeing a downward trend in applications. Many career centers are not seeing students coming in because there's a feeling of paralysis. We have to be aware of that. And the second quotation relates to DE&I. I'm most worried about the candidates who discount themselves from being, quote, not the sort of person we might want to recruit before recruiters have even opened their application process. So again, a particular fear among disabled candidates, candidates from underrepresented minorities, feeling that they should not be part of the process. We have to look out for that. So the takeaway here is that proactive and frequent outreach and really encouragement is really critical in this time. On the next slide is the second takeaway, which is that this is a unique opportunity to accelerate pilot programs and technology innovations. Experimentation. And I have a couple quotations to share. This is all a pilot. This should inform our ability to create some change in the organization. People are really leaning in right now, and we have leadership's attention and their willingness. Recruiters want to take advantage of this moment. Next, there is no playbook or rules of the road, and some ideas we're going to try won't work. If you're not okay with that, this is going to suck for you. It's not wrong if you try something new and it doesn't work. So a lot of people who had wanted to experiment thought, let's throw this in. And as I'll show you in a moment, there were some really big wins because we were willing to think a little bit outside of the box. The next quote, we've already done the work to transition to a virtual recruiting model. The opportunity now is to get better at becoming even bigger experts in the virtual space. So a desire to build expertise in an area that was just starting out a few years ago. And finally, there is no movement to become entirely virtual. Hybrid seems to be the message from employers. I think a face-to-face part is vital. We want to meet candidates and create that connection because it's too impersonal online. We don't see their passion as much and don't get to know them. Face-to-face will come back, but not in as large a way as it used to be. The face-to-face element of recruiting will be quite small, maybe as a final recruitment day. So again, the takeaway here, what works is experimentation, trying new things. And certainly we're seeing that from career services as well. And we'd love to hear your examples in the chat. And finally, the third takeaway. Oh, I forgot. I threw in a quote from Steve Rothenberg from collegerecruiter.com. One of the examples of experimentation is what we're seeing with virtual career fairs. And his takeaway is that they perform poorly at the top of the funnel, but the more specific, the more targeted we are in recruiting fairs, the better. And I think that also came through on the NACE town hall. So very targeted career fairs are one of the areas where we were seeing some movement and positivity. Now onto the third takeaway is the critical importance among employers of increasing transparency during this time, particularly to drive diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the areas where this came out was for disabled candidates. We used to be able to provide insight days in our office. It is critical that we use virtual technology to support us with continuing these engagements. And I'll be honest, we saw a lot more discussion of candidates with disabilities in the UK and APAC and across Europe than we saw in the United States. I think we're going to see a growth in attention to disability and mental health concerns and neurological differences here in the United States. That was a big focus overseas. The next quote, I think we need to be more explicit about what we're assessing and not let candidates guess. I want recruitment to feel less like a game and more like a dialogue, even if I'm delivering it virtually. We're going to be more explicit to tell candidates what recruiters are looking for. And the final quote, I'm refocusing recruiters, executives, and alumni to spend time mentoring diverse talent rather than just delivering presentations as a way of improving our pipeline in the future. So increased communication, increased transparency. On the NACE Town Hall, one company said that their CEO was able to be much more involved in a virtual way, and that was an opportunity for them. So I'm going to wrap up with 3 examples of how companies are tactically implementing these 3 takeaways and what we've learned. The first is an experimentation example. One company had their interns create a really fun Spotify playlist where every intern got to recommend a song. That was just a fun idea that really got everybody feeling bonded and was something they had never thought to try before. They're going to keep it no matter what happens with recruiting next year. Number 2, another organization wanted to use all employees to spread the word that their company was hiring. So they created a DE&I recruiting toolkit. Anyone at the company who knew people who wanted to apply were given the tools to do that so that everyone in their networks knew not only that the company was hiring, but that they wanted diverse talent to apply. And the third is an example of transparency, internship in a box. This was an organization that wanted to make sure that every single intern was given the same opportunity. So they got a box at home with the same technology, the same swag from the company. And I think really importantly, they all got a virtual background. So whether you liked your background or your home, you were living alone, you were with family, you didn't feel it was professional enough, everybody was on a level playing field by getting that exposure and that particular look to have behind them. So those are 3 examples of how companies applied the learnings from our research. It is now my total pleasure and honor to present Manny Contomanolis. I don't think I said it as beautifully as Jeannie, who will talk about the university perspective. Manny.
Hello, everyone. I'm so delighted. Thank you, Lindsey, and I'm so delighted to welcome everyone. As Lindsey mentioned, I want to take a view from the university side, and in particular, where I can, relate that to our career services work. So how would I describe to you what we all kind of evidenced in that time? Well, Jeannie, if you move the slide. The best way I could describe it was challenges, challenges, challenges everywhere. I think, when you talk about a business like higher education that is not known for its flexibility and ability to pivot, I think we were all in the month of March in particular, faced with, oh my God, what do we do? So what was interesting was to see how different individual organizations were able to respond to this. There were so many factors that influenced that, right? There were issues like, were you a private university, a public university? Did you have the resources to be able to do the kinds of things that you needed to do to respond to student concerns and stakeholder expectations? So it's really pretty clear that everyone was scrambling, but it was also clear that we learned more and more and more as we went through the process. So going forward, what is really the solution? What works? Well, in those instances where we found things that work, it was rethinking the paradigm. So let me give you a couple of takeaways, 3 takeaways specifically, that I think we all gained from the process. So takeaway number 1, which is virtual everything. I know we talk about Zoom fatigue, but how many of you were overwhelmed by emails offering you new services and new abilities to deliver things virtually? Well, essentially everything that we did and that we were used to doing and valuing by personal interaction, teaching, learning, advising, students interacting with one another, literally had to go virtual as campuses essentially emptied out. What was really interesting was the incredible support that and expectations that continued to be placed on career services in terms of being able to continue to support learners and employers. Let me give you a specific example from Northeastern. When the time the COVID pandemic hit, we had 5,347 students who were out participating through our cooperative education program. They were literally spread throughout the country and the world. And in late March, we had to completely pivot. We lost about a quarter of those co-op work assignments and were able to work with our employer partners to move the work assignments to virtual work for those students. It was a huge mind shift for the university. Before, we would have never allowed a student to do a remote co-op. Now, literally all the co-ops we were doing were remote. So the reality was career services, along with all our colleagues, really had to pivot. We really had to think about how are we going to offer our counseling? How are we going to offer our group sessions? How are we going to offer our websites and all of our content virtually? So let's talk about takeaway number 2. And it really became clear that health and safety were taking center stage. Again, let me give you an example from Northeastern. We invested something north of $50 million to create an institutional environment that was as safe as we could possibly make it. Every student who was on the campus, every employee, every staff member is required to be tested every 4 days. We have our own contact tracing capabilities. We do all our testing right on campus. We've had to reconfigure space, put in all the kinds of things necessary to address density concerns. We have a module called NU Flex, where students can determine from week to week whether they intend to physically attend a classroom space or opt for that particular session virtually. We designed an app specifically for students to do that. And of course, as you all know, all our institutions were trying to reimagine managing learner behaviors. So much was in the news about students that were suspended or sent home because they were not obeying residence hall policies or other kinds of things to protect them and to limit the density. Let's talk a little bit about takeaway number 3, and that's the focus on a positive but different future. I think it's fair to say we're not going back to the pre-pandemic world. Lindsey mentioned this, I'm sure Chelsea will, and we'll continue to talk about it in the question section. The future will be hybrid. And what's also very clear to me is that in so many ways, the pandemic has changed nothing but accelerated everything. So what we were seeing in terms of online learning, what we were seeing in terms of the greater flexibility in the way employers were recruiting and partnering with us, the kinds of things we saw about what was important in candidate selection and how do candidates need to present themselves, it's pretty clear that the emphasis on strength and skills will move to the forefront of talent acquisition. And I think, as we all realize, the convergence of DE and I issues will really put the focus on marginalized learners, those that are going to be challenged by a hybrid environment, whether it's because they have disabilities and aren't able to access and fully take advantage of the technology, or if they simply don't have access to the technology and are not comfortable in a virtual world. So I think even though it's challenging and we're not sure what that future is, I am absolutely convinced on the other side of this, we will be a stronger, more learner-centric environment And I think that's a positive thing, long overdue. So let me now, speaking of learners, let me shift it over to Chelsea and have her pick up.
Yes, thank you so much, Manny. And this is the perfect segue. We only have a few minutes to talk about students. This could be a complete, its sole workshop. So I'm going to try to just give you a few things to consider. And so before we get to the next slide, this is why we're here. We're here to talk about students and their experiences, understanding that yes, there are opportunities, but it's been really, really hard. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of our observations and how we move along in support of the next generation. Jeannie, next slide, please. So we had an opportunity at College Code right at the top of the pandemic to really say, how are we going to be supportive to students across the country amid this reality that we did not know would be here. And so we held several virtual programs, complementary programs to support students in skill development and simply to be a safe space for them to ask questions that they had been pondering this year, whether it be COVID related or racial injustice related. And so there's a few things that we learned that I thought would be helpful to share with the group. We had about 100 students who we worked with throughout the summer. First, we asked, what's the biggest challenge preparing for early career? And as you probably wouldn't be surprised, they said, well, managing the job search in this current environment. There's this new necessity for me to understand how I show up virtually, to Manny and Lindsey's point, and how I really need to be considering my job searching process and my job connections with employers through the process. What we noticed was that there were distinguishing factors for women. They identified their biggest challenge as navigating social networks. And I can tell you, even through a program I did last week, that there were continuous conversations about how do I show up digitally? How do I brand myself and how do I forge connections without being overbearing, understanding that there's so much going on in the world? They also identified unique challenges navigating intersectional experiences, which I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes, and Manny briefly stated in his session. We asked, what's the most supportive resource preparing you for career amid uncertainty? We were surprised by the result. First being the internet. We asked our group, what are you using these days? And they said, well, the internet. Our career services has been helpful. Our upperclassmen friends have been helpful, but no one seems to really know, because this is so much uncertainty, what to do. And so the internet has been my daily source. And so there is this constant hunger to find out what can I do, what are the resources available, and how do I move forward? In asking the question to women, we asked them, and they said their most supportive resource were mentors. And that was a clear distinguisher, where they said, I'm really in this moment reaching out to alumni, reaching out to employers who I might have met when I was on campus for recruitment days, and really seeking them as a support system in this moment. Our third point is around most important quality sought in a future employer. And this is where I think we will continue to see significant shift into the future. A vast majority of our participants said training and development. In this moment, with so many different skills being necessary, and the shift really in what is important from soft and technical skills, it was really stated, we want to be a part of an organization that's going to help us to develop through training investment. And women, interestingly enough, said, yeah, training is important, but commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, making sure I make decisions at places that are going to help me feel as though I belong, is what I'm really focused on in this moment. And so we believe that this is important when we talk about the student experience and some things that we need to be mindful of as practitioners and supporters in their development. Next slide, Jeannie. Despite significant social and economic changes, it becomes more important than ever for us to think about this hybrid model that was discussed earlier and making sure that we're staying intentional. So we have a few takeaways that we want to share. The first is around fostering virtual connections. And again, we've talked about how hybrid model is going to be the way of the future, but this requires us to be able to support students in making those virtual connections. I've done a lot of polling and asked students, do you have a LinkedIn? Question one. And then question two, how are you using the LinkedIn? And there's still a huge divide in terms of students being active on the platform is one example, and being able to leverage it in a way that is authentic and helpful. And so we asked the question around support system, and many students said, yeah, I have upperclassmen and alumni support, but they are trying to navigate this new normal as well. So it feels difficult to ask questions that in some ways they're trying to work through. And then again, I mentioned LinkedIn. We're being told, get on LinkedIn, leverage it. Employers are on LinkedIn more than ever, but how? How do we do that? And so I think our question is, or our call to action as practitioner is making sure that when we're talking about virtual connections, we are providing opportunities to build this new skill. Okay, fostering support systems and virtual connections requires us to stay close to the student experience and also stay close to the employer experience on how they're connecting with students on these platforms. Takeaway number two, keep it human. And again, Manny talked about that as it relates to understanding all of the different experiences that students are having. I think this is a takeaway that I'm passionate about, and I know that you're passionate about, because a study from the American Psychological Association said 7 in 10 Gen Zers are reporting depression and anxiety during this pandemic. Unprecedented levels. And I know we're talking about the opportunity in all this, but it's also really, really hard. And when we talk about people's family, where they live, et cetera, keeping it human and making sure that we're allowing those opportunities just for students to be, just for students to gain access to mental health, as Lindsey brought up, that's going to be an important factor, have to really be at the bedrock of us supporting them into the future. And so I had this one quote: I often feel I need the most support when I get that rejection letter, or after I've done everything I'm told to do. I followed up with the recruiter. I went to the information session, but I don't hear anything back. I need support sometimes because I just feel down and out. And so I think it requires us to engage students where they are, just as much skill building that we're offering, allowing those spaces and places for them just to be, just to share frustrations and to be able to help them move along. Next slide, please, Jeannie. And intersectional experiences matter. You heard that term. I don't want to make the assumption everyone here knows what intersectionality means. And so it's the overlapping, overlayered ways in which discrimination can hinder our progress. And so that can be race-focused, sexual orientation, location, able-bodied, as Lindsey talked about. All these different forms of our identity can create bias and challenge. And so I think now more than ever as practitioners, we have to think about making sure we're supporting students from that understanding of intersectionality, from that understanding of what it means to be a first-generation student, navigating this reality that's hard for everyone, but there's an additional level of difficulty for me. And so I think when we talk about effectively engaging students, it's important for us to center intersectionality. So what do I think is important for us to do? Make a conscious effort that our programs, our policies, our practices are thinking about all the different dimensions that students experience. Because oftentimes I'll hear students say, yeah, there was a great program, but I didn't see myself in the panelists. Yeah, there was a great skill development opportunity, but it's harder for me because of my status in terms of citizenship, or because of being first generation. And so it takes us a moment to take a pause and think intentionally into the future. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. And you've heard from our speakers and their reactions and ways which they've evolved their processes and approaches over this last year. And I just wanted to take a moment just to share that, at Cappfinity, we've also taken time to look at our own work and figure out what could be the greatest thing that we could offer to help organizations find hidden talent and prepare students for work while developing their career readiness in this entirely new world, which has led us to create which is a platform which provides strengths-based insight, essential skill development, and work simulations to all students, regardless of where they go to school. And it is really exciting to be able to offer this free to universities across the country in the US, so that students can be empowered and develop these life and work skills during the months and years to come. And incredibly proud to be partnering with Lindsey, Chelsea, and Manny on bringing this to life. So with that, I would love to turn it over to Lindsey, Manny, and Chelsea for a very brief discussion, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. And so let's see, Manny is coming on screen. And here he is. And so let's start off with Lindsey. I would love to hear from you. What are employers saying in terms of need or want from university career centers? Let's start there.
Thanks, Jeannie. And I just want to acknowledge there's so much good discussion happening in the chat. So I welcome all of you to weigh in the chat, especially to answer this question of how career centers are working with your employer partners right now in support of students. I'll just talk about a couple of answers to that question. One is certainly a lot of employers rely on career services to give them a sense of the overall experience of students, and to be honest, what everybody else is doing. You know, we got asked that question a lot during the research. What's everybody else saying? What's everybody else trying? And so ways that career centers can pull employers together, for example, regionally based events of employers, industry focused events, any ways that career centers can help employers avoid the Zoom fatigue that they fear students are going through right now. I think Chaim Shapiro said in the chat, we have to avoid overcorrecting. Right. And the fear is, well, if everybody's doing a Zoom event for BIPOC students, how are we going to get lost in the crowd? If everybody is sending an email, what are we going to do? So I think where career centers can be the central information source for all of these employers, I think that's a role among so many others that is really powerful. I see Chelsea vigorously nodding, so I want to toss it to Chelsea for what you'd like to add, as certainly Manny as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. I think in this moment, there certainly is the what's everyone else doing, but I think at the same time, it's an opportunity for employers, those who are on, to think about your brand and the value that you want to have in this moment, and to use it as an opportunity to truly be authentic to how you want to show up. Because I can say a lot of the conversations that I've had with students or early career professionals is they're paying attention. Right? The consciousness about decisions, who I want to be aligned with is probably more important than ever. So I think that's an opportunity.
I would just add during this time, authenticity is incredibly vital, more than ever before, because that's essential to getting the attention of students who, you know, I think are to a certain extent are kind of, as Lindsey pointed out, stepping back from everything. They're like, you know, this is too much for me. This is too daunting. There's no opportunities out there really. So you know what? I'm just not going to engage. And so the authenticity that you're able to demonstrate as an employer becomes really, really critical in getting that student attention.
May I add in really quick, because someone said authenticity, say more. So in 30 seconds, I just think, you know, I think with the authenticity, it's literally being honest about where you are. I think DE&I is an example. We know this year has been a banner year for that. So if you've really taken those steps as an organization, share it. But if it is new ground, say it's new ground, and just be willing to say, we're committed to this and here's what we plan to do. But I think students are just really wanting to see honesty and being able to see action behind statements and intention.
Sorry about that. I love that point about authenticity, and we certainly live by that at Cappfinity. And so, Chelsea, I wanted to actually share this question with you, sort of taking a different approach, but what types of programming, right? We've talked about zoomed out, right? That students are actually showing up for.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, the Zoom fatigue, the email fatigues, all the fatigues are real. And I think that the big piece with what students are showing up for has to do with what they truly believe is going to help them to land the job, as one example, or land the internship as one example. And so I was speaking with a dear friend who heads up recruiting at KPMG, and she was sharing, you know, I had this big event, we brought our partners out, only 6 students registered, and so I decided it just wasn't worth it at the moment. And we started talking about it, and what I've heard from students is, I am looking to build a very specific skill, or I realize I've been declined from several opportunities. I got feedback it's because I need to work on X skill, or I'm not even able to apply because I don't have the skill. And so I think that's what students are showing up for virtually, very specific, tangible, focused skills that they can put on their resumes and help them move forward. So I think if we're talking about the panels and the meet and greets, those are important. I don't want to say those are not important, but I think for those, what is going to be important is those intersectional experiences and stories, like what Lindsey was talking about. I go back to the disability or the ability conversation. We need to be mindful of that when we're talking about our speakers and their stories, and making sure we're highlighting that so that students can see themselves in the organization through those who are currently working there.
I would just like to add, I think we have this incredible opportunity in my mind now to help students form a different language. We need to move to the language of strengths and skills and competencies and interests, and away from majors and degrees. You know, I've said this often, in today's world, the talent acquisition world especially, it's about the skills you have, not the schools you attended. And it's about the competencies you've developed, not the curricula you pursued. And when you factor in strengths as the kind of overriding concept to this, right? Because skills and competencies essentially translate to a strength. And that understanding of strengths and leveraging strengths, for example, is so critical. And I think especially in a virtual world where you have to really communicate differently, and you have to really be able to talk a different language. And I think there's a real opportunity for us now to kind of fast forward on something many of us knew was coming, but like all things that we predict in the future, it's here.
Thank you so much, Manny. And I see that the chat is lighting up now that I can actually see the chat. But yeah, strengths, you know, that's certainly the language that we love here at Cappfinity. And one last question, specifically for Manny, you kind of alluded to this, right? But what do you envision as the post-pandemic future of career services?
Well, to the extent anyone can predict the future, I said it before, I think we've all said it, the world will be a hybrid world. And by that, I mean, we have to think about delivering our services in a much more flexible manner than ever before. And I think we have to think about that in a way that's also consistent with our institutions and our mission and the populations that we're serving. So I can see a world where you do a workshop or a seminar, you have to be able to deliver it virtually, even though you might have a live audience, so to speak. I think that the interest that students have is greater than what we might realize. In other words, think how many times students have an appointment with someone, right? They're sitting in the residence hall, they're in the library, they're squeezing you in between other important things. Think how much easier it would be if they just hopped on a Zoom call with you, something that now they've been doing for months. I think there is a demand there because there are certain elements of our work that are transactional. I need this kind of answer. I need this specific help. Look, our business has an art and a science to it. And I think hybrid says to us, understand where we make a difference by being connected in the same space and time, and understand where we could be more effective and efficient by using virtual technologies and virtual platforms. That's going to be the key for us, right? How we think through it, how we assess it, and how we're really, really smart and savvy about applying it in our settings.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Manny. And one last question, or actually we're going to move over to sort of the open Q&A because I see there's quite a few that are coming through. but one that was recently just shared is just reflecting on the town hall recently. We heard that applications are down, and you mentioned it, Lindsey, in your points, but even more concerning that students aren't going to career services in the large numbers that many of us expected. And so what can we do to address this by just providing, whatever it is, tools, incentives to encourage engagement?
I think you're referring to the NACE town hall findings. Yes. So yeah, a lot of campuses, not all, are seeing fewer students using the services, whether it's virtually or in person, if that is an option. And I'll tell you what I heard. There's also some really fabulous examples in the chat, and I'll mention the few that I've seen come through. One is more personalization. So some of the career services people that we spoke to, particularly in the spring when we were all thrust into this, said that they had been using their customer relationship management software or just their own records to reach out personally and say, Chelsea, I know that you attended this event about publishing. I wanted to invite you to something new. So really personalized approaches to students, which is not possible in all situations and for all campuses, but that was quite effective. Shorter sessions that were more focused were also really effective. And I see an example from Margaret at DePaul, the skills lab. If you scroll up, if you missed it, which she called 30-minute commercials for specific skills. Very, very targeted, very short examples of content were very effective so that students know that it would be a good use of their time. I also want to acknowledge in the chat, and this is something that we heard a lot, this is not necessarily easy to convince a higher education institution that has been relying on majors for all time to suddenly switch to a strengths conversation. I understand that that can be incredibly, incredibly difficult. So it doesn't mean that there aren't headwinds, but sometimes, going back to that idea of experimentation and innovation, if you sneak something in as a 30-minute webinar, or you sneak it in as an experiment or a pilot, or just something we're trying because of the pandemic, a lot of people kind of admitted that things they had wanted to try and felt resistance to, they were able to show really strong results now because of this period of innovation. So those are just some thoughts to me, but I really encourage everyone to look at the chat because there's some great examples, and please keep sharing them.
I just put a comment in the chat as well, and I always love to give Lindsey credit for it. She introduced a concept to me a long time ago that she referred to as CART when thinking about communications. And it's always kind of stuck with me, being concise, accurate, relevant, and timely. And I've taken that takeaway because I think it reinforces some of what Lindsey and Chelsea said earlier. When you think about the students today and engaging them, it's not that the need or the modalities have really changed much. The urgency has changed. And that's why we need to think about curated content. What matters to me? And in a culture or in a set of circumstances where students have kind of said, you know what? I don't think there's anything out there for me. I'm kind of retracting in my shell. This is too much. Part of the way of re-engaging people saying, wait a minute, there are opportunities out there. So, this kind of curated content that's really focused on what that learner is interested in has always gotten their attention, but now it becomes vital. So if you've been using weekly newsletters to all students, as an example, now's the time to get out of that mode. Now's the time where you need to curate to have multiple versions of communication that are organized in different ways so you can engage people and bring them in together in different ways. I think that's really essential.
Yeah, and Manny could not agree more. And I think about one example that an employer and a higher education partner started doing that's been helpful, and it's around student feedback on programming. And, we know one of the challenge are sending out post surveys and only getting 20 or 10%. And so they said, we started after our webinars, using the poll feature or any type of polling feature. In our last 5 minutes before we wrap up, we think about the 2 or 3 things that we need to get an answer to as a team, and we ask the poll right before they leave, because that's how we're going to be able to get that information and go back and execute on programming that's relevant. So that's just a tip that I think could be helpful.
Yeah. I really want to second that. We've been doing that quite a bit. So ending sessions and saying, tell us what you think right now. Put it right in the chat. And I'll be honest, at first we were a little concerned. Well, are people going to be honest? Are they afraid that comments are associated with them? To be perfectly honest, we did not find that to be the case. People were absolutely content to tell us exactly what they thought about a session, about a workshop, and so forth. So again, it's kind of rethinking the paradigm and just really be willing to experiment and not worry about failing at something. Believe me, the innovation comes from learning from your failures, not from failing, but from learning from them and reapplying it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And speaking about just learning and shifting the paradigm, question that we had come in for you, Manny, or at least you want to start answering it, is how do you actually balance hosting industry-focused career fairs without reinforcing the idea of majors equal career path? What are some ideas that you have there?
So I think that's a great question. I think all of us struggle with it. I don't really, we do two things. We try and not associate career fairs, virtual, obviously in this case, with specific colleges. We've kind of moved away from that. So when I say engineering or business, it's lowercase engineering and business, because the reality is that the world is totally moving toward multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. So part of it is not what you name the fairs, so to speak, but how you market them to students. And at Northeastern, for example, we invite every student to come to every fair. Now, how do you get a student who's studying design to go to a technology fair? By highlighting the kinds of opportunities that are available at the fair. So again, it goes back to what both Lindsey and Chelsea have said. It's crafting the messages for the people that you want. So if all you're doing is advertising a technology fair or an engineering fair or business fair, that's old school. That doesn't go nearly far enough. What you have to do is reach out to the populations you want to be there and give them a reason for attending. And that's by highlighting the opportunities that are there, by combining that messaging with, for example, students from quote unquote other colleges who were successful, with companies that are at that particular fair. So look, it means we have to work harder. That's the bottom line here. If we keep doing the same things in the same ways, we're going to get the same results. So I think we just have to work harder at it, and that working harder really kind of unleashes those new discoveries and new opportunities.
Thank you so much. And I see a comment in the chat, which sort of validates exactly what you shared, that they opened up programming that was initially to a certain underserved students. And they had students showing up and saying, these are the services we need exactly. And we've been offering them all along, but no one knew that they were available. And so it really is about sort of, advancing that lens. And so we have another question coming in from Lindsey. I'll send this one to you. How do you actually get students to come to a virtual fill in the blank, whether it's a fair, event, program? What are some thoughts?
I have to laugh because I feel like I got this question 5 years ago about in-person events, right? So I think we've always struggled with this question. And I see Chelsea nodding, what do people do at other campuses? Do they get people to show up? It's hard, and I love what you're saying, Manny, that this is hard. I really want to acknowledge all of you that this is not easy and we are working hard, and there are no, I wish I could come on and say, here's the silver bullet, everybody. We've done our research and this works to get 100% participation. And I'm a professional speaker. 50% attendance is pretty good in my experience when it comes to webinars. So I'm going to use another acronym, Manny, if you'll allow me, which is one of my other favorites, which is COPE, C-O-P-E, create once, publish everywhere. If I miss a Netflix show or, a TV show, I expect that I will get the recording. that somebody will talk about it on a TV show, that someone will tweet about it, that I will get a newsletter about it. And if I miss it, someone's going to text it to me. And I think that students, or all of us, have that same expectation. And I see many of you looking in the chat. Are we going to get the slides? Yes. Are we going to give you the chat? Yes. Are you going to get the recording? Yes. Am I going to blog all over it on LinkedIn? Yes. Is Chelsea going to put it on Twitter? Yes. That's what our expectation is. And so I think in some ways, and believe me, I don't like this either. I'd like everybody to be here, and I'm delighted we have almost 700 people watching, but we have to equally believe that it's important for them to watch afterwards, that if they get nuggets of it or the podcast version, that's okay. Now, that's hard if you have a career fair and there are companies that signed up for slots. I completely understand there are situations where that's not okay, but create once, publish everywhere means that the live event at 11 to 12 can't be the only opportunity people have to participate. So a couple of thoughts from me.
I think just, again, as a shout out to this community, information is a commodity, right? No one needs to see you to do a Google search, right? Information is a commodity. Wisdom is really what our students value more from us than ever before. I can find as much information and I could track it down, and students can do it as well as I can, frankly. But what they don't have is the experience, the wisdom, the connections, the ability to help curate it and put it in a context that resonates with them. So look, the value we provide, forget about technology, forget about virtual, forget about all of that. That's a modality. But what we can offer is the most valuable thing. So as individuals, the more we develop, the more we learn, and the more we can translate that learning to serving, not just students, by the way, but our employer partners, that is incredibly powerful. And that's not going to go away ever.
And, I think as my last point, to Manny's point, I think wisdom is the glue. I think that there was a question earlier that was around a playbook. Students want a playbook. Everyone wants a playbook, okay? And there's no formula. And that's the reality. We can give tools and resources, but I think when students ask the question, like, can you, create a playbook for me? I think the coaching moment is letting them know, I can give you resources and tools, but this is an experience, even as your supporter, I'm going through this too. And so I think that's building like the adaptability and the self-awareness and the personal motivation and all those skills that are so necessary for the moment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I feel like this is, we actually heard this on a previous call, just this notion of just supporting students and really helping them to develop and take ownership, but also understanding that they need support. And so I'm also going to drop it in the chat, but we do have playbooks and we have a manager toolkit that we will be sharing with everyone, as well as access to a free strengths profile, which is www.cappfinity.com/V, and we'll drop it in the chat for you as well. We do have a couple of more minutes and we could take another question or two. I do have another one that has come through. And this one is, from the student angle, for Chelsea, as we think about just going back to historically underserved students, how do we really support and engage students, especially at a moment where they may be challenged, right? We're hearing about the digital divide. We're hearing about, just all of the sort of challenges that they're experiencing. What are some of the things that we can do to really support and engage them in this moment?
Such a beautiful question, Jeannie, and something I've been thinking a lot about, like I know the fellow panelists have. And I think the big thing here is not thinking that we know their stories. Because even as someone who does the work every single day, I'm learning about the nuances. So I'll give you one example. One employer had a skill building workshop over lunch, and one of the feedback from an engineer who was working with the students was, why did some of the students have their video off? And he was upset, right? About, I'm giving this time and they're not on video. And I think it was a teachable moment that we don't know the reasons why people are not on video. In our minds, we'd want to say this person's disengaged. But then I think about the student experience, who students are like, we're sharing Wi-Fi. I don't have a place in my home to work. It's not clean and presentable for a employer. And so I'm trying to personally brand what my organization has told me to work on, but then I don't feel comfortable. I don't have the space, or XYZ scenario. And so I think, as people who are passionate, and I know the NACE community is, about our students, we have to use that empathy and understanding muscle, and in many ways protect them in this experience, because it's so much more than we can even fully understand. And so I think that that's like the opportunity for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Just to add, there was a question in the chat about, again, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let me tell you something that we decided to do at Northeastern, and that is, we are creating a concept called NU Place. We use NU a lot for Northeastern University in our branding. NU Place is pulling together the professional and career resources to support our diverse community. Now, that's not a particularly innovative idea, but it was an idea whose time had come. And so I think that so many of these things are in the moment, right? And we have to seize that moment. But one of the things that we also did was we said, well, wait a minute. There's so much information that's out there. How can we better leverage it? So let me tell you something that we did. We took all our existing partners, and we have a large number because of our large co-op program. And what we did was we looked at established rankings and recognition programs for diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. That Forbes, Fortune, Human Rights Commission, there are a wide variety of broadly recognized, entities that identify employers that have made this commitment. What we did was we took those, all publicly available, and we attached them to the employer record in our system. By doing so, we give students the opportunity to search for employers who have that recognition. And that was one small little thing, really, if you think about it. It's not very, complex. But we introduced another element to easily allow students to be able to identify employers that we were currently working with that had been recognized for making these commitments. And again, I think it was the timing of the Black Lives Matter movement, with us trying to think differently about how we can connect with students and support our employer partners, that led us down that pathway. So I just use that as an example about how we could think about these things differently.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Manny. And I'm watching the chat. There are a couple of questions specifically around DE&I. And one in particular is a question about, is it okay for career services to ask employers about their DE&I? And I can kick that off to Chelsea. Do you want to start with that one first? And then Lindsey, you could sort of chime in as well. But I think it is helpful to just provide some thought around that.
Yeah, 100% okay and important and critical. Again, the students are talking about it. They really, really are. I mean, this is not a secret. They are having the real conversation. They're texting each other. This company X, this company, I mean, it's happening. So I think as career services professionals who are mentoring, advising, coaching, yes, like we absolutely should ask the question. And it's not from a judgment place, everyone. It's from we need to know so we can advise accordingly our students. And so I think someone asks what kind of questions we can ask. This might be very straightforward, but how did your organization support your employees amid Black Lives Matter and some of the reality of this year? I think that's very, very important to ask. It can also be, what employee resource groups or councils do you have once new hires join your organization? Those are just a few that come to mind, but please do ask. Lindsey, do you have anything to add?
The short answer is yes. The details are, number one, ask your students what they want to know so that you can say to an employer, these are the kinds of questions I'm hearing from my BIPOC students. They would like to know X, Y, Z. I think that is really powerful. I think it's also getting beyond the PR statement that we care about, diversity, equity, inclusion. Of course you do. here are some very specific questions that we have. And I think when they're student driven, that's powerful. Manny, I'll pass it to you.
No, I totally agree. And I know we need to wrap up in the interest of time, but I would just say that it is absolutely okay. And I would encourage it, frankly. It's in the employer's interest, again, to demonstrate that in an authentic way. And, we're here to help our employer partners. So don't hesitate to push them on this front and recommend that they do certain things and articulate certain things in all of their on-campus and related recruiting and branding efforts.
Fabulous. And I just want to say one last thank you to all of you here today, to NACE, to all of our attendees. It's been an amazing chat. And I will now hand it back over to NACE.
We would like to thank Cappfinity for sponsoring today's program. We would like to thank the participants for attending today's session. This officially concludes the event, and you may now sign off.